a question, please put your virtual hand up and we will unmute you. You can do this by going to the participants page at the bottom and clicking the blue button. If you would like to ask a question but don't want to speak, you can always just send it in the chat to anyone with the TEDxUCSD name badge or to the moderators, myself or Todd. So for our afternoon session today, we have Amin Shaykho. His talk reveals the importance of stepping back and allowing ourselves to stop, think, and reflect in our busy lives. The moderators are myself and Todd. Todd, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Todd. I'm your other moderator. I just want to say I loved Amin's talk and it really resonated with me. I'm gonna go ahead and let the co-directors introduce themselves.
Hello, I'm Annika, one of the TEDxUCSD co-directors.
And hi, I'm Serene. I'm the other co-director, and we're really excited to have you, Amin.
Thank you.
All right, so we're gonna go ahead and just get started off with like an initial question for Amin. We're wondering, like, talk us through your process of creating your talk. What was it like, and what was the inspiration for it?
So when I wanted to create my talk, I wanted to kind of create something that basically anybody could resonate to, not maybe just entrepreneurs or maybe students. I wanted something that like any single person who watched can be like, oh, maybe this can kind of tailor to me. And so at the end of the day, the goal, or basically the theme I wanted to portray, was like the value of reflection and how it can help you with whatever you're going through. And for me, it happened to be just part of the journey of launching my company. And so I basically took kind of the audience from who I was before, what inspired me to basically go on this journey of starting this company and how much it meant to me. And as a result, because it meant so much to me, I wanted to work as hard as possible and never waste a second. And when you do that, if you kind of forget about yourself and only think about the end goal, sometimes you miss out important things like caring for yourself. And that's kind of what happened for me. And so in the end, at this competition that I lost, basically I felt like I lost everything just because I haven't been reflecting or pausing. And so once that happened, I felt like I had an all-time low. And so the key thing here was for people to see how I reacted at the all-time low and basically how I basically progressed through this creativity walk that I introduced. And this creativity walk was basically more than just a walk. At the end of the day, it taught me things like, you know, I guess, how do you think? How do you organize? How do you step back and see the bigger picture? And for me, I was very hesitant, and for a lot of people, trying something new might be hard at first. But again, there was something about it where I just kept trying and trying, and then I failed. But then for some reason, later on, like it was like a few weeks later, I naturally just got up out of my seat and did the creativity walk because it was kind of starting to form a habit, and there was benefit to it. And so for anybody who was watching, who's struggling with something that they're going through, I would encourage them to do the same thing, where they just take a step back and assess the situation through a creativity walk or through whatever helps them recover and sit back.
Great way to start it off. Thank you, Amin. A question from myself personally and some of the members on the team. Throughout your talk, you definitely showed everyone that, you know, your company, even though you started it at the very beginning of college, it seemed as if it was your own personal project. Whether it became super successful or not, it was yours and it was your passion. And myself included and many others, sometimes we fixate on certain standards of success and being able to achieve that goal right away. Like yourself, when you pushed yourself and to enter that first tournament and trying to get there and trying to win and you know, at least get into the finalist group. What would you say to people who fixate on certain expectations or standards of success? What would your advice be for those?
I think at the start, for sure, not fixating, but understanding some core. So your question kind of had two parts. I'm going to focus on the part about fixating on like goals for success, basically. It's like at the end of the day, I think it's very important to kind of set some sort of like basically like a timeline of what you want to accomplish and some goals that you think are important to you. For example, let's say like your goal is to be the best actor, and like you study Will Smith's life and you're like, okay, he did this at age 20, he did this at age 40, he did this at age 60, right? It's important to understand what successful people in your field have done in the things that you want to do. But at the end of the day, when you're actually living it in the moment, things might not go how you expect it to go. And so while you do need to set goals for yourself, you need to also understand that sometimes things might not go how you anticipate. So you have to be able to pivot, kind of step outside of your comfort zone at times and basically adjust. And so I think the key thing here, and especially for me, was kind of, sometimes it was, even to this day, sometimes I find myself fixating on stuff too much. But this is where kind of the creativity walk comes in. This is where the reflection comes in. When you step back and assess the thing from a bigger picture, you'll discover things that you may have not discovered in the moment. For example, with like a recent project I was doing, we basically have been trying to release a video feature for our company to help everybody who's been in quarantine with tutoring. And I spent a lot of time on this feature, right? And I'm like, okay, I'm not gonna stop till I get it perfect. So I'd work on it day and night. But then eventually I was like, okay, well, this is not going as fast as I want, not how I want. So I took a step back and I was like, okay, what's going wrong here? And so I was like, maybe I'm just overthinking it. Let me share it with other people on my team and get their opinions on it. And once they gave me their opinions, they were like, oh, this problem actually isn't as bad as you think. Let's just go ahead and release it and work on it, after it's been released. And so by stepping back and thinking about the situation, I was able to basically overcome that situation. And so that helped me basically, if the word is called unfix, basically unfix in that situation. And so just to summarize what I'm trying to say here, it's very important to have goals set and basically objectives set. But when you're going through the journey, just be aware that things might not go how you anticipate it, and get ready to adjust and try something new. And during this process, when you notice yourself, for example, failing, try to assess what went wrong and maybe try to pivot. And because not everyone's journey is going to be the same. How Will Smith became the best actor is different than how a different actor became to the level they are.
Wow, yeah, that's so amazing. We actually have a question from one of our team members ourselves, from Ayushi. How do you motivate yourself to keep going during this pandemic?
So it's definitely tough for me, and I know it's really tough for a lot of people. But when I try to think about like negative situations, it does. I think initially to everybody, there's a toll at first, like whether you like it or not. But what I try to think about is like the future. Like if I continue to be sad about the situation, like what do I gain, right? If I'm continuously overthinking about that same situation, what's the outcome of that? And personally, from past experiences, when I overthink about something, nothing ends up happening. It's just a waste of time. I keep digging myself down. And so I try to think about, okay, how are we going to get out of the situation? What's going to happen once we're out of the situation? And kind of think of the bigger picture after. And so, of course, I'm still, handling situations related to COVID right now, but I try not to occupy all my time by doing just that. And so personally for me, with my company, our biggest mission is basically to impact all these students all over the world. And I know right now students are affected a lot by this, whether it's graduation, whether it's the ability to learn without all this resources that you have in school. And so what's keeping me motivated is knowing that if I'm working really hard to basically create features that will help students once they're out of this situation, then even though it's hard now, once they're out, their situation is going to be much better. And so that's what's personally helping me. And for the larger audience, how you should be approaching the situation is, it's tough right now, and it's really important to care for yourself, care for family, talk with your family. But think about what you want to do after this is over. Like, how are you going to make an impact? And what are you going to do to basically help those who've been down? Are you going to are you going to inspire them through something funny? Are you going to make something that's going to change their life? Or are you going to be the best version of yourself after this to keep pushing forward? So try thinking about the bigger picture after what's happening, as hard as it is right now. And that's how I think a lot of people will get through this.
Yeah, pushing through, and not only that, but referring back to your previous answer, being able to set that goal. Maybe that goal to us in this current situation is, getting through quarantine, right? Just having a goal itself, right? Mm-hmm. That's great. Thank you for that question. We actually have a question coming in from Juan, who asks, in your professional journey, did you ever experience any familial pushback or pressures to take a different path? If so, how did you navigate through that?
Okay. So I guess to give a little like timeline of like kind of like my journey. So I'm 22. I graduated from college at 20. So I basically spent kind of 2 years of college in high school because I took some classes, and then I only spent actually 2 years in the university. And so my biggest goal in the 2 years of university was basically landing like a big corporate job, right? Even though I had my startup, I wanted to be doing two things at the same time, you know, until one kicks off. And so for the basically my dream was basically, I basically had a dream where the only company I would work at is either like Apple or nothing. And so if I got any other company, I just wouldn't take it. And for the first 2 years, I tried really hard to basically land like jobs like that, but I just wasn't able to get any. I was able to get an internship the first year, but nothing at a huge company of my preference. And so, you know, that was stressful because in addition to school, in addition to launching my basically my startup, I was like, okay, well, I need a full-time company job just in case this doesn't go how I expect it to go. And so that was really stressful. And so initially I was like, okay, I'm not sure what to do. But the thing is, I took some time back to step back and basically think about like, why am I not getting basically a job offer? And so I just that's basically when I started to learn how to organize. So because I had a lot of things going on and I wasn't able to dedicate all my time to doing something. And so what helped me recover from that was basically creating kind of like a schedule of priorities and then being able to align priorities on what matters to me the most at the very moment. And so my first year at that university, the most important thing for me was basically being able to land a job. And then right after that was getting those good grades. And right after that was basically having my company actually launch. And so I dedicated the first portion of that time strictly to just studying for those interviews because I prioritized that. I was like, this is the most important thing for me right now. So I'm going to basically tailor everything I do around this. And by doing that, I was able to spend more time and basically get the goal I wanted, which was get the interview I want and then get the connection I needed. And then once I established that, I reprioritized my other goals. So yeah, and I kept reprioritizing until I was able to achieve what I want. And so basically the end realization here is we all have different goals, but we all have limited time. So what you need to do is basically write them all down. I literally have a journal right here with all my goals for the week or for the day. And I basically shift them to what's most important at the very moment. And then once I accomplish, I check that off. And then maybe I reorganize the other goals in priority and then basically tackle them that way. And that way, when you can have your mind set on one thing, you accomplish it, and then you move on.
Wow, yeah, no, I love your thought process. It's almost like you're not only aiming big, but taking the time to think big as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we actually have a question from one of our team members, Vaibhav. Vaibhav, would you like to go ahead and ask a question?
Hi.
How's it going?
I really appreciate just like learning about, your journey. And my question pertains to how do you continue to innovate? And, I think one of the biggest issues is like when market leaders are innovating, they struggle to push and advance forward. And for you, as an up and coming startup and as a young mind, how do you continue to challenge yourself in that intellectual pursuit?
Good, very good question. This is, I think the number one way I do it is by kind of it's kind of the people who I surround myself with. I like to think and brainstorm of new creative ideas when I'm with people. And I've noticed that the people who I've surrounded myself with kind of have similar interests in doing so. And so what I find myself doing is sometimes, okay, so let me step back. So the question is, what do I do to continuously keep innovating, correct? Okay, so I like to basically look at the different markets, the different fields, the things going on in the world, and kind of like see, okay, cool, this is going on, but what's going wrong here? How could we improve this? And I naturally just ask myself, like whenever I see anything, for example, COVID-19, what's going on, right? Maybe was it the access to getting the assessments early on? Is it the awareness? I always like to evaluate what's going on with everything I'm doing, and just preparing in advance. Like for example, even with my startup, before we do anything, I think about what could go wrong here. And so I do that with the everyday life. And so my mind is always thinking, and with the close people around me, like my friends, one being my co-founder Marwan. We always like to brainstorm those things and discuss our realizations. And so this continuous thought process and discussion with people I know who are close to basically allows me to keep my mind stimulated with those basically new things that we can improve. And so that's kind of how I do it. I like to like just talk with other people about different things. And I've kind of, the thing is, I don't know if I like purposely go out of my way to do it. It just kind of comes to me just because of I'm just interested in how can we improve different systems around the world.
You know, there's a famous quote from the former, I guess, former chairman and CEO of the Walt Disney Company, who said that, if you don't innovate, you innovate or you die. And so taking your approach on that, that's really interesting how you also agree with that statement. You need to keep moving forward. And with that, I actually have a question from the audience from Alan, who said that he greatly relates to your style of work. I do too, and how they say that old habits die hard. So were there any times where you caught yourself possibly falling back into overworking? And if so, how were you able to get back into the trend of reflecting and going on to those creativity walks? Like, how were you able to break the habit?
Yeah, yeah. I often find myself almost falling in that trap a lot, just because it's like when you really want to do something, this is like you're so set towards it, you're just gonna work, you're gonna go out of your way to do it. The thing is, after I experienced it the first time, I kind of now always know that this is the answer I need to do. I need to step back, go on a jog, do a walk, and basically just clear up my mind. And so initially, the reason it was so hard for me was because I had never experienced what it is like to step back. And so I just like never knew what it was. So I was like, it's a waste of time. I'm just now going to try it. But once I did experience it, I know the value that it is. And it's like this, it's like I always feel guilty when working really hard, nonstop, because my mind just naturally starts clogging up. And so I always there's always the two decisions. Do I keep pushing forward with a clogged mind, or do I take that time off to basically pause, take a quick break, and come back much more creative, much more energized? And honestly, after I've experienced it the first time, I just naturally find myself taking that situation. And even if I don't do it, I kind of force myself to do it now. And so it became a habit basically, where every time I force myself, it's hard, but eventually, if you keep forcing yourself to do something, it takes 21 days to form a habit. And at the end of the day, like after you do it for 21 days, you will just naturally find yourself getting up. And what basically encourages me to keep doing it over and over again is that literally the moment I get up, like whether it's like a treadmill if it's raining or going outside to walk, jog, a mix of the two, when I come back, I always find myself progressing literally like 3-4 times as fast or even as smart and more creative as I was right before I did it. And so actually going through it is basically the motivation that I have. And it's crazy once people do experience something like that step back of creativity. And I know many people can relate to it. Like when you spend all night writing an essay, it starts off easy, but then it gets harder and harder and harder and harder and harder. And with an all-nighter, maybe it's not possible because it's due due that night or due that morning. But with a project that has a wider deadline, when you come back to it the next day, you're like, oh, how did I miss this, and this, right? And so those realizations is exactly what you get after you take that step. You take that step back, you take that break. And so that's basically the key component here that basically gets me in every single time.
Oh yeah, I love your story of progression, how you just keep going and going and going. You've been doing so much, like starting up and creating since like your early days of like Code for Care to now like with Kadama. So what's next for you? Do you have any idea of what's the next big startup or your next big idea?
So at the moment, I think there's a lot going in the education field. There's our company, like sure, we started off a tutoring platform, but we're working on a lot of different features and like operations that we can use to like go beyond just tutoring, more into like the actual educational experience. And at the end of the day, there's a lot to do there. And so I'm really focused on doing that right now. There's a lot of cool things going outside of tutoring, obviously. I'm just really focused here right now. And again, like I said earlier, you never want to fix it on something too much. And so I do have the balance where I'm constantly looking at different things, but at the very moment, I know that my passion lies here, and I know that there's a lot to achieve, especially with education. So like, you guys know, like, I don't know, maybe that's a side topic, but just to summarize kind of the biggest problems going on there, is that, you know, as students, there are two big things happening during school, right? It's learning, and it's kind of like discovering your passions and what you want to get into, right? And with the current education system, I feel like there's not a lot of flexibility in students doing so. And so we're working really hard at Kadama to see how we can kind of like influence that. And it all has to start down at the elementary level. And so those are some of the goals that we're working on tackling, the bigger picture goals, which keep me motivated and driven, because it's more than just working on a tutoring service. Now it's working on, okay, learning from these students, learning from educational systems, learning from all these different people on what's going wrong and how we can go in and improve it. And so while maybe necessarily I'm focused on education, I'm not focused on one thing. I'm focusing on like multiple aspects within that. And I think that's kind of a big attribute to what makes any company successful. It's when they pivot and when they do more than just one specific thing. Like, for example, you see Facebook doing that. They've pushed onto Instagram, they've pushed onto WhatsApp, and they're trying to help a lot of different basically sectors. And I think diversifying is also a key aspect. So that's what we're trying to do with education. And that really drives me, because at the end of the day, when you see some student's life change and be affected by something you've done, it inspires, and it's very heartwarming.
Yeah, you know, I actually want to take it back. You said going back to the elementary level, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think this is a good segue into this next question of from Coco, where she asks, what was your motivation to working hard? You know, what was the fundamental idea that got you to work this hard?
So okay, that's a great question. I think there were different goals out of it all throughout my life. Again, something very important that I think everybody should take is that it's very important to have basically goals that are changing over time, and obviously still have like set goals, but also have a lot of smaller goals. And that's what helps you grow. When you're and so the thing is with me, in basically the high school period, my biggest goal was to basically just get into college. That was before I had a startup, and that's kind of before I started getting involved with all these different things beyond school. And so my biggest focus was, okay, how do I get into the dream college? And so that's how working hard started off. I was like, I'm just going to get the best grades, try to get as many extracurriculars as possible, just so I can land whatever school I want to do. And that got me in that habit where every day I come back from home from school, finish my work, and then go out. And that was the mentality I had back then. And again, I kind of started developing that habit, and I was like, okay, this is doing really well for me, because when I work hard, I'm able to get the school I want. I'm able to get, this, and this, and that. And so I was like, naturally, when I go into college, I'm going to keep doing the same thing. And I'm just going to do as much as possible, because I'm working hard now, but it's paying off. But in the moment, working hard was just kind of blinding me from the bigger picture, because it was my definition of working hard was just basically focus on this one end goal and just go out of your way to achieve it. And that's how basically I forgot the bigger picture of like, okay, well, I need to worry about other things, like, okay, worry about working hard, but also caring for myself, taking a break, taking a breath, and all that stuff. And that's where it like all spiked up, and then eventually just went right back downhill. But and to just specifically answer your question, your question was like, what inspired me to work hard, correct? Yeah. And so it's just that end goal. I was like, in order to achieve it, I just need to dedicate my entire life to achieve this. And so that's how I basically picked up that habit.
Yeah, I love your working mentality. It's definitely something I could relate to personally.
Thank you.
Okay, so move on with another question from a person off our team, Monica. Successful innovations all have two sides, much like how social media can help connect us, but also how we could get caught up in dependence and like likes and comments, etc. When releasing a product, do you think often about the downstream consequences, and how do you go about dealing with the potential negative side effects?
Okay. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the downstream consequences?
Yeah, so I guess some of the downstream consequences that Monica's trying to talk about is like how Facebook has likes and comments that people get addicted to, or how sometimes a certain design can add this unnecessary friction that people have to deal with or think about.
I see. So basically, it's like when releasing something, what could be some drawbacks out of it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something we think about now, more so than we did in the past. In the past, when we kind of did an action, we're like, okay, we're just gonna, if we think it's good, then everybody's gonna think it's good as well, and so we just push it out. But now, after we started getting users, we noticed that if we do make a decision, like maybe move a button somewhere, then a lot of people may think that's inconvenient or difficult, and it would affect them negatively. In our case, negative. When we say negative, it means they're not. Basically, it's not as easy as them as it should be to get the tutoring they need. And so, I think how we learned to basically like think about it in that mentality was basically after a first failure, when we released something without thinking about like the consequences, and we saw the consequences. That's what kind of taught us like, okay, well, maybe we should reevaluate what we did there, and in the future, whenever we roll out anything, we should get more feedback. We should basically figure out what could go wrong. In terms of our specific like company at the very moment, I think there isn't a very big example that you may be looking for in comparison to Facebook, because like, for example, as of now, Facebook, everybody knows like likes, comments is actually affecting people in a psychological aspect, right? And so maybe that's something they never thought about in the current moment, but over time they realize that. And right now, Facebook, I think, has already started doing some steps forward to mitigate those problems by, I think they're like trying to hide, they hid some pages, they're hiding some parts of like those engagements to make it less of the focus of their feature. And I think while we hit it in like a kind of smaller amplitude as they did, we still were made aware of that situation. So now in the future, every time we make a release, every time we go out and do something, we always have that in the back of the mind. How does it impact the customer? And I think that's really important for a company. You put the customers first. We ended up redesigning almost everything about our app just because they were like, okay, we want to do this instead of this. And while it does hurt at first, it turns out what they're saying is very valuable, and it actually leads to more significant growth. And so now that's our mentality. Like before we do anything, we think about like, what harm could it do? What's the benefit? What is the risk factor? Because, and also sometimes it might not be a perfect like harmful, non-harmful. It might be in between. It might be like, okay, 90% of people might find this beneficial and 10% might not. And so then you have to evaluate those risk factors and see, is it worth it? Do we take that chance or not? And so that's kind of the mentality we have now.
Yeah, and to go along with different types of mentalities, my next question is actually, the mentality facing education. What major challenges do you think our current education system is facing and needs to be addressed? I know that your company is, it's based off of your attempt to reform the education system, but on a larger scale even, or maybe even on a smaller scale, what do you think should be done, and what do you think can be done?
Yeah, for sure. Personally, and I think that the biggest problem with the education system is kind of the lack of personalization. And it seems a bit broad right now, but to break that down, I think the two biggest issues that arise from the lack of personalization is like basically the influence on how students learn, and basically the effect on how students identify passion. And those are two big things that do require personalization. And having a standardized school system makes it difficult, because there's going to be a majority maybe that do appreciate how the system works, but there's always going to be those like outliers that may not be able to learn in this type of environment. And in a very high level, to break it down, basically there's kind of two main like ways of learning. In this case, there's like listening to a teacher teaching at the front of the classroom, and there's the second part where you're applying what you've learned and you're actually solving problems. And so right now, the way classrooms are structured is you go in for 50 minutes, you take notes, which is kind of the learning process, and you go home to solve problems. And then you come back, you repeat. So there's another method of e-learning where people can actually be assigned those lectures to watch at home and then come back into classrooms and only solve problems. And so if you compare the differences here, one is kind of more, one has a greater focus on those who like to learn by listening, and one has a greater focus on those who like to solve problems and basically do more interaction, and that's their method of learning. And so some schools have experimented with making adjustments in the two, right? And so there's a lot of different things that can be done that can affect how people learn and how they discover their passion. Another thing is, by having set curriculums, students may not be able to identify what they're truly interested in, right? So I think all the way up to middle school, maybe in some schools, middle school, there's electives, but in elementary school, everyone has to take the same thing. But what if everybody had the chance to dedicate 20% of their time to work on something that's of their interest? And that could be the way basically teachers can, in schools can kind of create that part of their curriculum is especially at a young age, is by working with the actual parents of the students, and being in that continuous conversation to identify what the student is interested in. Maybe at a young age, you could be interested in building Legos and stuff, right? So that could be a sign that maybe you're interested in, some sort of engineering, right? You really don't know until you work with the parents and the students. And I think dedicating aspects of your school journey to this personalization process will be very influential. But the thing is, one reason, and there's been a lot of research, Oxford is a very huge supporter of this personalization aspect in both learning and passion. But currently in the United States, at least, one of the big problems comes down to the student level, where I don't think, the teacher level, is because they're not getting the support they need to actually be able to stimulate and help those students. One being they're very underpaid, and a lot of maybe schools, districts either are not aware of this, or they're just not interested in change at the moment for whatever reason it is. And so that's where the problem kind of lies. And I think that's what we're trying to do with our platform, go in and try to mitigate some of those problems by working with some of those institutions and learning what students need and helping combat that.
Wow, yeah. I love how you had that whole exploration on your stakeholders, consumers, and just overall the people behind your company. To work off of that, we have a question from an audience member, Deborah. She'd be interested in asking you how you address networking and how that's been incorporated into what you do. What are the most effective ways that you've personally networked to help meet your goals?
That is a great question. I think that is the foundation of anything, especially with us starting the company. Networking was kind of the reason we actually made it. We were able to create our company, because when we started our company, I was 18, my co-founder was 17. We were just coming out of high school. We're a technology company, and no one knew how to write a single line of code. So, what are we gonna do? But Marwan and I, through high school, we've done a really good job with just talking with different people. And the thing is, networking branch off. Networking is literally just a conversation with someone. There may not be a purpose. You can just talk to someone how's your day? You can just be walking at a park and just see any random person and be like, how's the day? Just build that little connection with people. And building those connections over time, you start accumulating this thing called a network. And for us, when we were first starting off our company, we didn't know what to do. And so one of the first thing we did was research. And after research was kind of reach back to our network and see who could help us. And so that's exactly when it came in clutch. For us, it was a bit easier because the first part of the network was my co-founder's dad, who knew somebody who directed us to somebody who basically helped us build the first prototype of the app. And that's how we got going. And so that's how networking played a role in our beginning. But it continues helping me all throughout, today. And I think how people should achieve a successful network is not by always going with the mentality of I'm gonna meet this person to gain this out of them. It's with going that mentality that I'm gonna meet this person to build a connection with them. As simple as that. And how you do that is by being more open-minded, by being just, I guess, talkative and more social. You just build those very simple connections. And surely you can go with that perspective of benefit in some circumstances, like a career fair or something like that. But by just building that network, by conversing with people, I think over time, you will naturally be pushed to the direction where you want to go. And what helps here the most is if you're actually trying to gain something out of this networking, like maybe I want to find somebody that can help me launch the next healthcare startup, is by doing research and getting yourself more involved with events that can have people of that nature attend, right? Like maybe go to different meetups, or adding people on LinkedIn of that nature, right? And so you can be a little bit more strategic with it if you have like an end goal. But if you don't necessarily have an end goal, what helped us the most is just by building that network naturally through connections and just like talking to people. When we actually needed it, that one day we were able to reflect back and like think, or basically like utilize a network or like a relationship we had created in the past to help us in the future. And so that's kind of how it's played a role in my life.
Cool. Thank you, Amin, for that. And we actually have another question from the audience. Secondary question from Coco. She asks, you talk so much. It's a lot about time, right? A lot of this is about time. Heck, you graduating early was about time. Being able to have more time to work on your company, being able to really just like spend, and those walks themselves, that's time out of your own day. That's time out of your personal day to take care of yourself. And so she asks, what was the thing that manifested your realization to not waste that time, to put it towards something that was either productive or productive for yourself, which might even be about taking a break there.
Okay, and so just the question is, what basically inspired the initial like realization that I should not waste time?
Yeah, essentially, like what got you to just not waste time? What got you to just set your mind to things and make it productive instead of just wasting time?
Let me think about this one. I think so for me, it kind of started off like I guess like when I transitioned like into the middle of middle school. For some, it like happened just 1 year over the summer, and I think it was kind of build up because I do remember before I made that transition to like kind of like get straight A's, I didn't have straight A's and I didn't really care as much. But I think it was kind of the people like around me, like so I still remember like my mom saying like, look at your cousins, like they're doing really well, look what they're able to do. And I think hearing that kind of talk and encouragement, saying like, okay, this is what hard work does for you, like kind of looking at other like successful people who have done it, and breaking down. Okay, so I guess the first realization was like, okay, I basically I kind of like accumulated like a list of people who I found successful in my life, and I was like, okay, well, how are they able to do it? And at the end of the day, it turned out they were doing it because of they were dedicating a lot of time and hard work to achieving that. And that started off with being just like my cousins, and then that branched off to like influential people that I started, like maybe like celebrities I started like watching movies of and being like, oh, okay, cool, how did they get there? And slowly by seeing people who were in a situation that I wanted to be one day, and kind of like assessing like how did they get there, and just naturally I was like, okay, well, it seems like they're all doing what they want to do because they're working really hard toward their goal. And so I literally think that just clicked to me that one summer transitioning into like 8th grade, where I just basically, instead of like making school a second priority, I started making it like a first priority. And ever since then, I've just been on like basically that mentality where in order to achieve something, you need to work hard, you need to work smart, you need to work strategic. And so yeah, that was I think the biggest like influence, just seeing other people in the spot where I want to be. And again, I was in middle school, so to me the definition of like what I want to be was very blurry back then. But we're just seeing people in a good spot in life and being like, okay, how did they get there? Doing a little bit of research, whether it's my mom telling me, well, this is how my cousins did this, or this is how, by watching these videos like TEDx videos, I think, or like just influential videos of a little biography on how a certain person made it to where they are. I was able to like discover that the biggest theme here was hard work and being strategic with how you work. And so that's kind of what like I guess like triggered me to go on that path as well.
Wow, that's absolutely amazing. When I was in middle school, I think all I cared about was like how I was gonna persuade my mom to give me chocolate milk instead of regular milk.
No, that's strategic too.
Yeah, honestly. I'm gonna go ahead and pass it. We have a question from one of our team members, Serene. Serene, would you like to ask a question?
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, Amin.
How are you?
I think you touched up on this, like right in your previous your previous answer, but who has been your biggest inspiration, I guess, so far throughout your career?
Okay, does it have to be one person? Because the thing is, there's like a lot of people kind of like that I like look up towards. There's like a good subset, but I think I always the okay. Maybe I'll start off by explaining like how I kind of like how I end up like having them and being the role model, and then like maybe give like one example of someone. But it's always people that the biggest thing I look forward when like trying to follow someone's footsteps is basically like, I guess like in a way their personality, and then in a way their worth ethic, and then in a way what they're accomplishing at the end of the day out of doing all that. And like, for example, number one is like people who are charismatic, people who like to help others. That's something that draws me in. And so naturally when I see people like that, I'm like, oh cool, well I'm interested in seeing what they do and learning from them, because I feel like I can improve myself in this. And people who maybe are working hard and helping other people, I'm like, wow, they're helping people, they're doing so much good, what can I do to reach that spot? And so I kind of like to look at others who basically kind of have like not a higher standard, but people who are doing well in certain areas I'm lacking weakness, and being able to, cool, if I follow in their footsteps, it can help me improve. And so I mentioned this yesterday about a person who I consider, I guess, a model in a way, is one of my like coworkers. His name is like Andrew, right? We're like pretty much the same age and everything, but how he approaches things is a bit different than how I used to approach things. He's like the person who used to say yes to everything. I maybe was a bit hesitant, right? But that kind of mentality, saying yes to everything, actually expands into much more. It's like, okay, well now you're saying yes to things, but now because you're doing this, you're meeting more people, you're learning more, you're doing so much more. And I think the reason I wasn't like that before is based on maybe I was just, I guess, a bit shy, maybe hesitant, for whatever reason it is. But by seeing him doing it, and seeing what he's able to do to achieve, basically what he's doing and how it's helping him, I naturally was kind of inclined to doing that, and found inspiration in that. And I think that helps me in my every single day, in my day in life. And so he's played a huge role, because he's encouraged me basically to always seek opportunities. For example, like the first talk I ever gave, I was a bit hesitant to do it, but he was like, I mean, what are you gonna, okay, let's just assess the pros and the cons. That mentality to say yes. And he was like, this is what caused me to say yes every time, because the pros always outnumber, and usually the biggest cons when saying no to something, usually the biggest factors of you to say no to something is either fear, or, you're just literally you're scared to go out of your comfort zone. And so that mentality of always wanting to do something and saying yes is basically someone who's comfortable with being uncomfortable. And so kind of that's what he inspired me to do. That's what he symbolizes. And that's why I consider him like one of like an influences in my life.
That's a really good answer.
Thank you.
Honestly, if you were to even ask me that question, I have no idea. To be completely honest. Another question we have a question from Hannah, who asks, and I definitely agree with this question too. How do you avoid being paralyzed about the future, since your goals are so large, and at first they might even seem impossible to reach, but to quote Walt Disney, a wish, was it like a dream is a wish your heart makes, right? So how do you even tackle these problems? What are the steps you do to be able to get to these goals?
Yeah, no, I love that question, because this always happens to me, because I always find myself, I have so much I need to do, and there's so much need to be done, but like, how am I gonna get there? And it literally always happens to me where I'm like, okay, I'm working on this so much, but for some reason, at one point, I'm like, okay, well, like, why am I doing this? Like, there's always a like small like loss of hope here and there, and I think that's natural a lot of times, because if you're working on something super big and gonna be impactful, then you're naturally going to find yourself thinking like, oh, well, I'm barely doing anything. You know, maybe I'm not good enough, right? Because it's such a huge problem. But what helps me recover, and what's always helped me recover, is literally that creativity walk that I discuss in my talk. It's when you take that step back to reorganize your thoughts and rediscover, or not rediscover, but revalidate what you're trying to do. And so if you have so much going on, you sometimes will literally find yourself getting lost between all these different things and not being able to progress just because your mind is like fogged up with all these different things. And so by taking that step back, when I take a step back, there's two things I try to break down, right? How do I get out of the current situation? And what am I trying to achieve out of doing all this, right? And it's never the same for me when I go on that when I go on that walk to free up my mind. It always happens in a different process, but the common theme here is that I try to assess what I'm trying to achieve by doing something, and then being able to reorganize, reprioritize the goals to get to that. And taking that step back and identifying is literally like the solution to that problem for me. Because usually when I feel like I lost purpose in a way, that's when I'm overwhelmed. And I think there's so much going on, I just will not be able to do it. So by taking that step back, you kind of like break down the things that you've been fixating on, breaking those down, readjusting them, seeing what's going wrong, how you can improve. And then once you fix that structure or those goals and the priorities of those goals, you end up refining your purpose and the value and basically the motivation and encouragement, because now you have a clear path to follow. And so how I get to the situation is when that path basically dissolves. And so by taking a step back, I'm able to recreate the path, remold the path to be able to follow it again. And it's always going to be a process. It's a cycle that I'm very confident forever. It's going to continue happening, because we're all growing, we're all changing, and obviously we're all, yeah. And so this is something that people should not be scared of. And I think that was one big thing that I learned. I used to be scared of moments where I would lose motivation, because I would think that I've been wasting my time all this time, and that what I'm actually doing is worthless, right? But then when I step back, I'm like, oh no, it's just because I'm overexhausted, I'm overwhelmed. Let me break down everything again and basically redraw my path. And so that's what helps me when I hit like situations like those.
Yeah, we're getting back to those ideas of like self-reflection, pivoting, thinking big. We have a question from one of our team members, Macy. Is there a specific thing that you personally experienced within your education journey that helped spark your idea of producing Kadama?
So yeah, I think how it was all inspired was just because, so early on, I remember like in school, I guess tutoring was kind of a big of a hurdle for us, just like financially. So we never actually leveraged it too much. We relied more on like the resources in school. And at first, when I was making that adjustment, like I said, it was like I think like early middle school, adjusting from kind of like that mentality where like school wasn't a priority to a priority, it would have been really beneficial for me to have the additional tutoring, just because I was kind of getting into that mindset, right? And I understood the problem that I had, but I'm thankful to have learned how to kind of like adjust on my own. But just knowing about that basically the challenge that I faced, and how that same challenge could be much greater for other people, was one of the key things that motivated me to start Kadama when we graduated from high school. Another thing was just how inaccessible tutoring was. Again, and the number one thing was being the cost, right? And so I thought, like literally one day I thought to myself, what if the price for tutoring was maybe a third of the price, right? Or more accessible to, let's say, like 70% of people? What kind of impact would that do? And so just naturally thinking about that, I was like, well, there's kind of an easy solution, lower the prices. But the thing is, how do we get there, right? And so I basically did a lot of research on why other tutoring centers have like an average of between $60 to $70 an hour. And I was like, and we discovered the problem with that. And I brought that back down to the core issue. And that's kind of like how it all started. And I think, while it didn't necessarily affect me at a huge level, I definitely do understand that it is affecting other people in a much greater way. And so that was kind of the inspiration behind it, and just knowing that it does affect people. And we know like whether there's two problems kind of that we're solving with Kadama. It's like the student debt issue and then the learning process. And like one of their two goals is to have like the best tutoring experience with our platform, whether it is like getting paid the most through the system we have, or what is the flexibility, and then how you're learning, right? And the affordability, the accessibility. So those are like the goals we're achieving. And even though I was aware of the problems, and I could have been on the bridge where, like I could have crossed the bridge where I fell in those holes. I know that other people are facing those problems. That's kind of really what triggered us to start this company.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, sorry, I got distracted for a few seconds there. Actually, I want to take it back to that other question when you started talking about you were scared of being motivated, right? You were scared because that's what lit the fire and got you running, right? And to relate this back to another speaker that we had earlier, Elizabeth, where she talks about fear, she talks about risk. What's your take on risk and risk taking, not only just as an entrepreneur, but also just as a human being, being able to take yourself out and go on that creativity walk? That's a risk on its own, because you're using your own time, right? And away from something else that you could be doing, but you're doing it for yourself. That's kind of a risk. So I want to know what's your take on that?
I think we all do risky stuff. I guess like you said, a risk can, things like taking a creativity walk, even though it may not seem like a risk, it is like a risk at the end of the day, because okay, I was so focused on working hard. The risk here was allocating time to do something else. When I think of risk now, it's much different it's a bit different than how I used to think about it before. When I think about risk now, how I approach anything in life right now is literally by like evaluating the pros and the cons of everything. If it's literally like, if there's just one extra pro, that can be a huge motive to why I do something. And so I approach risk like now, like I said, with this pro and con list, and I evaluate, okay, if I take this risk, is what I'm losing going to outweigh the benefit, right? And in the case where the creativity walk comes in, right, I may be losing time. I may lose time for the next 21 days trying this thing. But at the end of the day, if I lose it, there were a few pros that came out of that, was getting that exercise, right? And so I think that's something that kind of helped encourage me to follow, basically to listen to my brother and do the creativity walk. While I didn't believe it was going to do anything, I was like, okay, worst case, I'm going to get some exercise, right? So I kind of approached this risky situation with a positive mentality of, I'm going to gain the pros out of it. And even though I didn't think it did anything to me at the very moment, what happened was it did. And so that proves that taking risks is beneficial. When I think about risk right now, I think obviously if it sets the pros and the cons and the pros outweigh, you should definitely go for it, because risks are kind of like, let's say there's a bubble and that's like your life. Those risks are different stair paths and different like stairways that you can take to go outside of your comfort zone. And once you're outside of your comfort zone, that is where you grow. And starting the company was a risk, because we invested a lot of time. We used our internship money, all of it, to basically finance it. The creativity walk was a risk because it was a risk of my time. Moving to a different state is a risk. So the small things in your life are risks, but if you think the pros are going to outweigh the cons, when you add up the pros of all these different risks, you're becoming a new person, you're learning more about yourself, and you're growing. And so that's how you should, risks are, yeah, if you assess the pros and cons and you play it right, then risks are very good. And sometimes the pros and cons may not be clear at the very moment, and that's what causes people to push back. And so if the pros are not evident in the very moment, just evaluate the risk factor. Like, is this going to cause me to, like, if the biggest risk is me sacrificing like one day of hanging out with friends, then I should make that strategic decision to go for it and do it. And so that's how you should basically treat the situation of risk.
Yeah, no, that was amazing. just let everyone know we are running a little low on time, but to me at least, this is a great investment of time. So we have a question from two of our members, actually. They're both wondering, how have you been affected by your culture and background, and how has it shaped you to be the person you are today?
Cool. I love that question. I'm multicultural. I'm Arab and I am American. I was born and raised here in Washington State, but my family's from Syria, so I speak Arabic, and I'm like invested in both cultures. And obviously, there's benefit of having amazing Arabic food, but there's other benefits like that multicultural like thought process helps me understand like different issues that people face, and like that builds compassion, that builds my ability to work better with others, that builds like understanding, especially with a lot of the issues you see today with like different like clashes between cultures and stuff like that, especially on the news and media. It's because people don't understand how it feels to be, I guess, different. Maybe they're not aware of the values of being different, and just by me being like an Arab American, I kind of understand. I already do understand the differences between being an Arab and being an American, and I know how amazing it is to have both cultures like fused together, in the values of this multicultural multicultural. And so by being an Arab American, by growing multicultural, it helps me understand other people, and I think it's very valuable, and it helps me just like naturally, just because it makes it easier for me to work with others, and that perspective on how I approach things is critical. And because like I think that at the end of the day, the reason we have all these different issues that we see in the media every single day between culture and stuff is just because of lack of awareness. And being multicultural has made me aware, and so that solved a huge problem. I think that's the biggest problem, and I think that's why it's very important for us to meet new people and be open with our cultures. Maybe it is sometimes like if you're growing up different in a new area, in a new environment, it might be like overwhelming or a bit like scary to actually share who you are just because you're different. But when you do, all of a sudden you've exposed all these people who have never met a culture like you to your beliefs and to your culture, and now they're aware of it, and now they see the values of it, and then they can pass it on. And so that's, I think, the biggest thing that I cherish from being multicultural, I guess.
Well, thank you, Amin, for joining us today. I have one last question. It's from left field, but we're asking you about what you want your legacy to be. So Hannah asks, if someone gave you a piece of paper and the pen at the end of your life, what are the top 3 things you would want to write down or say to leave behind?
Okay. The #1 Fortnite player. No, I'm kidding. I think definitely #1 is just a positive impact. Like that's literally just change at least one person's life. So that's that's I think that's #1. #2, I think is I guess like positive energy. So whether maybe if the first one didn't go out well, maybe the second was whenever I see people, I'm able to leave them with a positive like vibe, or like just some sort of like benefit, or some sort of good, maybe an encouragement, a slight encouragement, like a little tap on the back, something like that, just through conversation, stuff like that. And so that would be the #2. #3 would be basically somebody who wasn't scared to try new things, because I think like my biggest fear is to not be able to do what I really want to do. And so I think by what we talked before, like having that mentality where I approach things with a yes, approach risks with like a open mind, having that mentality is very key for me to be able to be that type of person who goes out of their way to do new things, and basically kind of like try to innovate in a way. And so those are kind of like the 3 things that I guess I would want to be known for.
Well, thank you, Amin, for once again, thank you for joining us today. On behalf of the rest of the TEDx team, it's been my honor to have been able to work with you this past little while to get you onto the TEDx stage and to give your talk and share your idea worth sharing. And to the rest of everyone still listening here, thank you for joining us for our Rebooted events today. That's all we have for today. Please tune in tomorrow at 10 a.m. for Hannah's Q&A, and you'll be able to watch her talk on via the link that we have put in the chat already. But thank you so much for joining us today. We hope to see you tomorrow.